Karen had always considered herself the unofficial queen of the neighborhood, wielding her authority as the self-appointed enforcer of the Homeowners Association, HOA rules with an iron fist. From the moment she moved into the prestigious gated community of Oak Ridge Estates, she made it her mission to ensure that everyone adhered to her stringent, often exaggerated interpretations of the regulations. She prided herself on knowing every resident, who belonged and who didn't, maintaining what she considered a certain standard of living. The moment she spotted a black man pulling into the driveway of the house 2 doors down from her, a house she had always envied, her instincts kicked into overdrive. To her, this could only mean trouble. He had to be a trespasser, a worker overstaying his welcome, or perhaps a squatter taking advantage of an absent homeowner. It didn't even cross her mind that he could actually own the home. After all, in Karen's mind, the residents of this exclusive community looked a certain way, her way. As she peered through her window, she watched him park his sleek, black Tesla in the driveway, step out with an air of quiet confidence, and begin unloading boxes from the trunk. His attire was crisp but casual, a designer polo shirt, tailored jeans, and a Rolex gleaming under the sun. Yet, despite his well-groomed appearance, Karen's mind was already spinning with assumptions. He didn't belong here. He couldn't. It wasn't possible. Without a moment's hesitation, she stormed out of her house, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she marched toward him with the righteous fury of someone convinced they were defending their territory. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice sharp and authoritative. The man turned around slowly, his expression unreadable as he took in the sight of the middle-aged woman glaring at him with open suspicion. "Can I help you?" he asked politely, though his posture remained firm, his demeanor calm but cautious. "I don't think you understand," Karen huffed, folding her arms across her chest. "This is a private community. You can't just be here loitering in someone's driveway. If you're delivering something, I suggest you hurry up and leave before I call security." The man's brow arched slightly, amusement flickering across his face before he masked it with neutrality. "I appreciate your concern," he said coolly, "but I don't think that'll be necessary." Karen scoffed. "Oh, it absolutely is. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we don't tolerate people hanging around suspiciously." She eyed his car again, as if expecting to find some telltale sign that he was up to no good. "Who exactly are you here to see?" The man's lips curled into a half-smile, but there was an unmistakable steeliness in his eyes. "That would be me," Karen blinked. "Excuse me? I'm here for me," he repeated, tilting his head. "Because I live here." Karen let out a short, incredulous laugh. "No, you don't. The Hendersons own this home, and I know for a fact they would never—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air, thick with unspoken prejudice. The man exhaled sharply through his nose, his patience visibly thinning. "The Hendersons used to own this house. I bought it 3 months ago." Karen's face twisted in visible confusion, her brain scrambling to process this information. No, that wasn't possible. She would have known. She would have been informed. This was her neighborhood, her domain, and she prided herself on knowing every real estate transaction that happened within it. And yet this man, this stranger, was standing in front of her, claiming that he owned the house she had admired for years. The house she had, at one point, considered putting an offer on herself. A house that, in her mind, he had no business living in. For the first time, uncertainty crept into her expression, but it was quickly replaced with indignation. "I don't believe you," she snapped. "I want to see proof, right now." The man, unfazed by her demand, let out a low chuckle and shook his head. "You want to see proof?" he repeated, his voice laced with quiet amusement. "All right, Karen, let's go inside." Karen's face twisted in disbelief as the man casually gestured toward the front door of the house she had long admired. The audacity of it made her skin prickle with indignation. There was simply no way he was telling the truth. No way someone like him had the means or status to buy a house in Oak Ridge Estates, let alone one of the most coveted properties on the block. But as much as she wanted to dismiss his claim outright, a small, nagging doubt took root in her mind. What if he wasn't lying? What if, by some miraculous stroke of luck, he had somehow tricked his way into buying it? No, impossible. There had to be an explanation, and she was going to find it. With her arms crossed tightly over her chest, Karen planted her feet, refusing to move. "I'm not stepping foot inside that house," she snapped, eyes narrowing. "You can't just waltz in and expect me to believe you." The man smirked, clearly amused at her resistance. "Suit yourself," he said with an easy shrug, walking up the stone pathway and unlocking the front door with a smooth swipe of his key fob. The door clicked open effortlessly, revealing a modern, stylish interior, the kind of decor that screamed money and class. Karen's jaw tightened as she caught a glimpse of the pristine white marble flooring, the elegant grand piano near the foyer, and the sleek, designer furniture. It didn't make sense. Everything about the house exuded sophistication, the kind she associated with the old money families in the neighborhood, not with him. Still, she refused to back down. "You could have stolen that key," she accused, stepping forward. "Anyone can break into a house if they know what they're doing." The man sighed, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Lady, I don't have time for this," he muttered before pulling out his phone. With a few quick taps, he pulled up an email and turned the screen toward her. "Here's the deed to my house," he said flatly. "You want more proof? Here's my mortgage statement, my closing paperwork, and even my utility bills. Would you like to call the HOA board to confirm?" He knew exactly what he was doing, and it only infuriated Karen further. Her eyes darted over the screen, scanning the documents for any sign of forgery, any loophole she could exploit. But there was nothing. His name, Marcus Ellington, was clearly printed at the top of each document, next to the property address she knew all too well. A deep sense of frustration bubbled up inside her, but she wasn't about to give up just yet. This was her neighborhood, her domain, and she wasn't going to let some outsider waltz in and take over. Crossing her arms, she glared at him. "Well, if you're really the owner, then why haven't I seen you before? People around here don't just disappear for months." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "Because I travel for work," he replied smoothly. "Unlike you, I don't have time to stand around and gossip all day. But trust me, I own this house and I plan to stay." Karen bristled at the jab, but she wasn't ready to concede defeat. "We'll see about that," she snapped. "I know the HOA rules inside and out, and I'm going to find out if you actually meet the requirements to live here." Marcus tilted his head, his expression shifting from amusement to something colder, sharper. "Oh, you mean the same HOA rules that say a homeowner can't be harassed by a nosy neighbor?" he shot back. "Or the ones that say race isn't a factor in who gets to buy property here? Because something tells me that's the real issue, isn't it, Karen?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She wasn't expecting him to say it outright. "Excuse me?" she spluttered, her voice rising defensively. "Are you seriously accusing me of being exactly who you've shown yourself to be?" Marcus finished for her. "Yeah, I am." A hot flush crept up Karen's neck. She had prided herself on keeping things civil, on hiding behind policies, bylaws, and neighborhood standards, but this man was cutting right through the pretense. Still, she wasn't backing down. Not yet. With a huff, she turned on her heel. "You haven't seen the last of me," she warned. "If there's anything shady about this sale, I'll find out." Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching her retreat with a smirk. "I'm sure you will, Karen," he called after her. "You seem like the type." As she stormed back to her own house, she was already plotting her next move. Marcus might think he had won this round, but she wasn't about to let him, or anyone like him, ruin her neighborhood. Karen fumed as she stomped back into her house, her mind racing with ways to get Marcus out of the neighborhood. He had embarrassed her, humiliated her, in front of his own doorstep, and she wasn't about to let that stand. As the self-proclaimed enforcer of the HOA, she knew she had leverage. Rules, regulations, and red tape, these were her weapons, and she wielded them mercilessly when it suited her. If she couldn't remove Marcus outright, she could at least make his life miserable. With a haughty sniff, she grabbed the HOA handbook from her bookshelf and began flipping through it, her manicured nails tapping against the pages as she searched for anything she could use against him. Her first idea was simple: compliance violations. Everyone in Oak Ridge Estates had to maintain their homes to HOA standards, and even the smallest infraction could result in fines, warnings, or even eviction if left unresolved. She grabbed a notepad and pen, stormed back outside, and began inspecting Marcus's property like a detective at a crime scene. She scrutinized every inch of his front yard, looking for weeds, chipped paint, anything that violated the sacred HOA rules. Her eyes locked onto his trash bins, sitting at the curb even though pickup wasn't for another day. Gotcha, she scribbled furiously. Next, she spotted a garden hose slightly uncoiled on his lawn. Another violation. A smug smile curled her lips. She was building a case. By the time she returned home, she had a full list of petty violations to report to the HOA board. Without hesitation, she sent an email titled, "Urgent HOA Violations, Needs Immediate Action." In it, she outlined every single offense Marcus had committed. His trash cans left out too early, his lawn needing better upkeep, the non-uniform doormat at his front door. It was all minor, but Karen knew the HOA board could be relentless when enforcing their policies, especially when she pushed them hard enough. Feeling triumphant, she sat back and waited. Within hours, the HOA responded. A formal notice would be sent to Marcus, instructing him to correct the violations or face fines. Karen grinned, already imagining his reaction when he received the letter. But the next morning, her victory soured. Karen stepped outside, coffee in hand, expecting to see Marcus fuming. Instead, she found him standing casually on his porch, laughing as he read the HOA letter. She frowned. Why wasn't he upset? She watched as he pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Within minutes, a sleek black SUV pulled up and a sharply dressed woman stepped out, carrying a folder. Karen's stomach twisted as she recognized her. Victoria Sanchez, the HOA president. Victoria was all business as she walked up to Marcus and shook his hand. Why was she being so friendly with him? Karen's smugness began to crack as she watched Marcus hand Victoria the violation letter, followed by another document from his folder. Victoria scanned it, let out an amused chuckle, and then looked at Karen's house. Her face twisted with something Karen didn't like, mild annoyance. Moments later, Victoria turned and walked straight toward Karen's porch. Karen stiffened, plastering a fake smile on her face as Victoria reached her. "Karen," Victoria said in a clipped tone. "Did you submit these complaints?" Karen lifted her chin. "Of course, we have rules in this community and everyone is expected to follow them." Victoria pursed her lips, then held up a piece of paper. "Marcus already filed an appeal, and guess what? His violations are meaningless." She sighed, then gave Karen a pointed look. "I reviewed the complaints. Trash bins. The rule says they can't be left out more than 24 hours before pickup. His were out 22 hours early. The lawn? Perfectly maintained. The doormat? She scrambled to reread the documents, her fingers trembling as she clicked through the files. But the truth was right there in front of her. A cold realization settled over her like a dark cloud. 3 months ago, Karen's house had gone into foreclosure. She had hidden it well, had even convinced herself that she'd find a way to fix her financial issues before anyone found out. But the bank hadn't waited. The house had been sold at auction. And the highest bidder? Marcus Ellington. Karen's stomach dropped. She had spent the past few days trying to evict him from the neighborhood, when in reality he now owned the very roof over her head. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Slowly, she turned her head, dread creeping up her spine. Through the window, she could see Marcus standing there, hands in his pockets, a knowing smirk on his face. "Karen," he called, his voice dripping with amusement. "We need to talk." Karen's hands trembled as she clutched the doorknob, her mind racing in pure panic. This isn't happening. This couldn't be happening. For years, she had prided herself on her power, her control, her influence. Yet here she was, standing in her own doorway, staring at the man she had tried to evict, who now owned her house. Marcus looked far too amused for her liking, his smirk widening as he leaned casually against the doorframe. "Not gonna invite me in?" he asked, tilting his head. Karen stiffened. No way. This was her house, wasn't it? Except it wasn't. She swallowed hard, stepping aside reluctantly as he walked in like he belonged there, because legally he did. Marcus strolled through the living room, his sharp eyes scanning the space as Karen shut the door behind him. He let out a low whistle. "Nice place," he said, "though I have to say I wasn't expecting it to be so lived in." He glanced over his shoulder, the smirk still present. "Tell me, Karen, when exactly were you planning on leaving?" Karen's breath hitched. He can't do this. He wouldn't actually kick her out, right? There must be some kind of mistake, she blurted, forcing a laugh that sounded shaky even to her own ears. I still live here. Marcus raised an eyebrow, pulling out his phone. Within seconds, he had an email pulled up and was scrolling through official foreclosure documents. He turned the screen toward her. Not according to this, he said, his voice cool but firm. You stopped paying your mortgage nearly a year ago, Karen. The bank foreclosed 3 months ago. I bought it, fair and square. Karen's vision blurred as she read the words on the screen, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She had known her finances were in trouble. She had known she was behind on payments. But she had been so confident she could pull some strings, push back deadlines, find a way to keep everything afloat without anyone knowing. Yet here she was, exposed, defeated. I just need time, she stammered, trying to regain some control. I can fix this. Maybe we can work something out. Marcus crossed his arms, amusement flickering across his face. Work something out? He echoed. You mean like how you tried to have me kicked out of my own house? Or how you ran to the HOA the second you saw me move in? Karen flinched. That was a misunderstanding, she lied. Marcus chuckled darkly. Sure it was, he sighed, slipping his phone back into his pocket. Look, Karen, legally you've got 30 days to vacate before I have to start formal eviction proceedings. I could push it to 60 if you don't make this difficult. He shrugged. Or I could call the sheriff first thing tomorrow, your choice. Karen's knees buckled. Eviction? Her? She had spent years making sure her neighborhood only had the right kind of people, and now she was about to be thrown out like some nobody? Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. You can't do this, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I've lived here for years. This is my home. Marcus's face hardened. Funny, that's exactly what I said to you a few days ago. Karen's stomach churned. This was it. She had lost. As Marcus turned to leave, he paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork, he said. In the meantime, I'd start packing. Then, with one last smirk, he stepped outside and shut the door behind him. Karen stood there in stunned silence, her world crumbling around her. She had tried to evict him, but now she was the one about to lose everything. Karen sat in her now half-empty living room, surrounded by boxes and bitterness. Her perfectly curated world, the life she had built through control, manipulation, and exclusion, was gone. Every time she looked around, she was reminded of her fall from power. Just a week ago, she had been on top, dictating who belonged and who didn't. Now, she was the one being forced out. Her phone had become her enemy. Every call she made for help, friends, former HOA allies, realtors she had once bossed around, had been met with the same response. Polite sympathy, then excuses. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to help her. Not after the HOA had formally reprimanded her for harassment. Not after her financial problems became public knowledge. And worst of all, Marcus had done nothing but watch. He didn't gloat. He didn't rub it in. He didn't have to. His mere presence in the neighborhood, his existence as her landlord, her replacement, her victor, was humiliation enough. 30 days had come and gone, and now she had hours left. Karen had managed to find a tiny rental unit across town, far from the prestige of Oak Ridge Estates. It was smaller, older, cheaper. A place she never would have allowed in her neighborhood, but it was all she could afford. As she stood at the curb, watching movers load the last of her belongings into a truck, she spotted Marcus standing in his driveway, hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. She hated him, hated his calm confidence, his success, his ability to take from her what she had spent years believing was hers by right. But what she hated most? He hadn't lifted a single finger to ruin her life. She had done it to herself. She had made an enemy out of a man she didn't even know, simply because he didn't fit her mold of what a homeowner should be. She had picked the fight, thrown the first punch, played every dirty trick, and lost. With her jaw clenched, Karen forced herself to look away, stepping into her car and slamming the door. As she pulled out of the driveway, her knuckles white against the steering wheel, she saw Marcus shake his head with a small smirk. She knew exactly what that look meant. She had never been in control. She had just convinced herself she was. As she drove away from Oak Ridge Estates for the last time, Karen finally understood. She had spent years deciding who deserved to live in her neighborhood, and in the end, she was the only one who didn't.